Today there are several critical issues we wish to address. You would have an opportunity to hear from the shadow ministers of several of our key portfolios. And so I'd like to begin with just a few brief remarks, and then I would like to invite our chairman, Dr. Dwayne Sands, to then address several issues. He would be followed by our shadow minister for social services, who will address again a number of critical issues. You would have heard the views of Maxine Seymour on a number of matters, not just related to women and girls, but to vulnerable Bahamians, and she will once again address some of those critical issues. You'll also have a chance to hear from Senator Michaela Barnett Ellis, who also have spoken on a wide range of issues, not just in the Senate, but outside. I offer apologies for a few of our colleagues who are in Grand Bahama today, and others who are dealing with some other matters on behalf of the party. Adrian White is presently in St. Lucia, dealing with several critical issues related to the Public Accounts Committee. I begin by joining all of you whose hearts go out to many Bahamians who are grieving because of the loss of loved ones in general, but in particular, those that have lost loved ones because of murder. We are gathered at a time where we are celebrating the incredible contributions of women, and we're in the midst of paying tribute to outstanding Bahamian women in sectors across the national life of the Bahamas. But while we celebrate their contribution, knowing that in many instances women have been the backbone of our organizations, whether it is in politics or within the faith-based community or non-governmental organizations, and increasingly in the private sector, we have the irony of grieving with the families of a grandmother who was just taken from us just over the last couple days in the most brutal of fashion. In the midst of our celebration of Women's Week, we can't help but think of a dear little girl, 12 years old, who lost her life tragically. Because in many ways our system did not work. The village that is designed to raise the child did not work. As a father of a 12-year-old girl, it is especially painful. And I can only imagine the grief, not just of this dear soul that has been lost, but other children who have been victimized by violence, whether it's at home or a result of a stray bullet fired by someone who is not committed to building the nation you and I love so much. We understand clearly that the tragedies that we are facing as a country is not of any government's creation. The reality is that every parent has the responsibility to socialize their children in the proper way so that they can grow up to be productive, law-abiding citizens. And we understand that the private sector has a role to play. That while it seeks to earn revenue and benefit its shareholders, it must also have a social conscience to contribute to the very society where its customers come from. And since government cannot solve all of the problems, yes, there's a need for non-governmental organizations that fill the gap, like those who run the numerous feeding programs, those that provide counseling for young men and women who are facing anger management issues or drug abuse issues. And there's the faith-based organizations that through sharing their word, that is the word of God, they are able to help more persons live a life not only of civility, but a life that can guarantee them eternal life. But what is true is that governments are the most influential stakeholders. And as we deal with this issue of violence, one of the sad realities in the Bahamas is that the government we have is failing to lead. This does not rob parents or the private sector or NGOs or faith-based organizations of the role that they have to play. But what we are saying is we're expecting a government to coordinate the various stakeholders to address the crime that is savaging our country. Year after year under this PLP administration, we are having record numbers of violent deaths in our country. And that does not fully tell the story of how many young men and women have been maimed. It doesn't tell the full story of the $100+ million that it's costing the Bahamian people in terms of investments they must make in security, in terms of business loss. We are losing investment simply because people are fearful of often doing business in the country. And this government appears to be clueless, rudderless in finding appropriate ways to bring stakeholders together to design preventative programs. Instead, the government is creating initiatives that duplicate the services that others are already effectively providing but needs additional resources and assistance to expand programs that have worked. The government is having problems in terms of interdiction and successful prosecution because of how slow our system is moving. And the added burden of members of the public losing trust in the agencies that they must depend on for protection. And the government failing to restore that trust by being transparent in its investigations of the criminal justice system in general. If the gatekeepers are not trusted, the public will not be cooperative in providing valuable assistance, including information, to help us stop criminality at the level that it exists. And then thirdly, when persons are prosecuted and those that are incarcerated, we do need a system that will rehabilitate men and women so that they could return home to their children, but as productive, reformed citizens. So the government, despite its cut and paste program, borrowing some ideas from the internet, still they're not getting it right. On the preventative side, they're not getting it right. On the surveillance and interdiction side, they're not getting it right in truly speeding up or providing their term, swift justice. And on the back end, they are making precious little progress with stopping recidivism, persons returning to jail after being released. And when asked tough questions about what some may consider to be extreme measures, they start vacillating and stammering. We are clear. We are not clueless. We understand that no one measure is going to end crime in the Bahamas. But those measures all combined will increase our chances to succeed, from prevention all the way through to rehabilitation. One of those measures that this public has cried out for many years is the imposition of the death penalty. We are aware that there are some of our children who have grown up to live life in a way that nothing strikes fair in them, and there's no respect for the person or the property. and that no amount of capital punishment will alter whatever mission they are on. But there are some who will think twice and change their course if they know that they can pay the ultimate price if they inflict the ultimate damage, taking somebody's life. But even when there isn't deterrent, there is a moral imperative for punishment. And so we are very clear. This is a straightforward issue for us. The capital punishment is on our books. We don't try to serve people some fallacy that all crime stops after it is carried out, but we do say clearly and simply, we support capital punishment for the role it can play as a deterrent as well as punishment. And we believe wherever the executive and the parliament can make adjustments within our laws to make this process more efficient, that they ought to act. They ought not to vacillate on the issues. And if a prime minister has said, as a couple have said, that they support it, we only ask you to show us the evidence of anything that you have done in order to discharge your duties to carry out the laws of the Bahamas. We make a commitment to non-governmental organizations, faith-based organizations, the private sector, members of civil society, that under my administration we will work closely with you, understanding our role as the lead organizer of stakeholders, to make sure we put in place programs that deal with prevention, that give our young people an opportunity to unleash their talents, to have marketable skills so that they can obtain the jobs that are available, to create new opportunities for Bahamians. We will work tirelessly to make sure that without fear or favoritism, that we interdict, we bring to justice those persons who are not minded to make the right decisions about their lives. We will not be partial based on who may have supported us on the ground in the election. It's either you are going to help build the country or we are going to address you using all of the available resources in our system. And then, of course, we believe in second chances. So for those that are incarcerated and are minded to return to society, as committed, responsible citizens, we will do all we can to make sure that they return home to their children, but as role models. I shift gears to just briefly talk about some of the most unfortunate remarks made by our Prime Minister, where he sought to blame Bahamians who are hurting, who are suffering at this time. Blame them for the very pain that he has helped to inflict upon them. The Bahamians who are making choices between whether to buy food, pay rent, mortgage, or pay their light bills, they have Prime Minister Davis and Minister Sayers to hold largely responsible for that. They came in, they got sound advice, clearly documented, including programs that had already been implemented that saved the Bahamian people millions of dollars and stood to save us even more. And those programs, some of those they just simply canceled. They no longer pursued the rate reduction bond. They canceled the hedge program. And as a result, they ended up lending money to BPL while asking ERCA to increase your electricity bill, and you are feeling the effects of a litany of bad decisions by Prime Minister Davis. And even the money he loaned to BPL did not appear to go to what it was designed to, which is to pay off the debt that was owed. And on the heels of that, he has avoided at all costs competitive bidding as he now chops BPL up into segments and privatize it without going through all of the requisite processes that are outlined in law. The net result is that you are paying higher electricity costs. If that were the only thing, it would still be bad, but there's more. The Prime Minister has had no plans that has borne fruit in helping to reduce the cost of food in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. More recently, he has talked about increasing production of food, cutting imports by 25%. This is 3 years later. The Prime Minister and his team, for all of their claim of bringing sexy back to agriculture, as if sexy has ever fed a single Bahamian family.
All right now.
They have failed. They have failed to reduce imports by 5%, 4%, 3%, 2%. They could not identify a single product, including eggs, that they have reduced the imports by 1%. Forgive me, 0.5%. So we do not take his food security program seriously, and we do not take seriously his claims that he's working with stakeholders to reduce the cost of food being sold in our food stores. Bahamians are hurting. And many senior citizens right now are still struggling to get food assistance from the government. We are grateful that the Minister of Social Services have now issued a directive that all of the senior citizens who have been complaining about being taken off the program while they go through a verification process, that they must be returned. And we are appealing to all of those who can affect this decision and make it happen quickly to do so. It is wrong for our senior citizens to have worked all their lives contributing to this country and to have a struggle to get a voucher to get food. It's wrong. Bahamians are struggling to find suitable accommodations to live in. And this is precisely why we have indicated we will lead a housing revolution in the Bahamas, where Bahamians from all walks of life will be able to afford homes that will in fact be consistent with their socio-economic bracket. In other words, depending on what your revenue is, we believe that there are housing solutions that can meet your need. And so we intend to launch a robust competition between architects and engineers who will be able to design housing solutions that are climate smart, that take into consideration energy conservation, that have the building material that does not add to the carbon footprint. And we have even Bahamians who are now in that business of creating zero carbon blocks. And that also they will design homes that fit into the particular geographical area that residents are interested in living in, whether it is over the hill in family islands or in more affluent neighborhoods. Secondly, we believe that with the land resources we have, the people's land, that we should make available land that will be deposited in a land REIT or a land trust, and that we would use that land trust in tandem with private investors in the Bahamas so that we can enter into public-private partnerships in order to source funding to build homes in those various categories. And contractors of all political colors and no political colors will have an equal opportunity at participating in the construction in a similar way that Bahamians of all political stripes will have an opportunity for fair access to housing, rather than relying on your member of parliament or your minister to attempt to hand out political trinkets. We will hold this organization, the public-private partnership, between very few government officials and predominantly private sector actors responsible for being transparent in all of their operations and they will be audited on a regular basis to make sure that they are executing the development of the housing program. Our people, many of them have been waiting for decades to access housing. Many of them are public servants or work for companies and have worked for these companies for decades, yet they are shut out. We will insist that financial services institutions disclose all related fees to housing and land transactions so that there are no surprises for the eager and vulnerable potential homeowner. And we will ensure that at the end of the day, they ought to have the ability to switch lenders when they decide to do so. If you're going to talk about the demolition of unregulated development, whether it's the traditional shanty towns or over the hill where some yards have 6, 7 houses without the proper sanitary conditions, the most humane way to execute that is to ensure that there's adequate housing available at a price point that makes sense for people to transition in living in situations with dignity. I'm going to stop there, and I'd only say, as I call my colleagues to join me in addressing the issues that you've come to hear, is that we are in a tough place as a country. And many of our young people, those of us who have relatives or children who are off to school, we know that they have very little interest in returning home. They are building other countries because they believe there are more opportunities. Unless we change the direction this country is going, that brain drain is going to be made worse. And it's amazing to me that this administration, they are meeting those children overseas. And Bahamians, the Bahamian diaspora is growing. And you know how they are meeting them? They're meeting them because there isn't a flight they are willing to miss. The Prime Minister is constantly gone. The Deputy Prime Minister, who's quickly catching him up, has been the longest acting Prime Minister in the Caribbean. You are unable to clear your desk and to address the range of issues that are in the in-tray in the office of the Prime Minister if you are not at your desk. The reality is the Prime Minister is gone too often. His spending priorities are terrible. He has surrendered the Ministry of Finance to the Financial Secretary. The business community are in fear for their survival, not just when armed officers come in with a compliance unit. They are fearful for their very survival. And our employment status is at risk when businesses fold because a government is clawing monies out of not only the consumer's pocket, but the business pockets because of their failure to manage the resources they have already. With that, I'd like to invite Dr. Dwayne Sands to come and address some of the issues related to health and one of the scary things that's happening in the parliamentary registration department relative to a foreign company. Dr. Sands, we need you to come and fix your mics, please. All.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Leader. I start where the leader of the opposition left off. We are in the midst of a crime crisis. And one of the institutions or one of the entities that stand in the gap would be our acute care hospitals. Princess Margaret Hospital, as you know, is the preeminent hospital in our country. That, along with the RAND, they deal with the victims of violence and trauma every single day. And I think we owe the doctors, nurses, EMTs, and additional staff a debt of gratitude because they stand in the gap. A month ago, the Minister of Health and Wellness on a public platform, promised the people of the Bahamas that the renovation of accident emergency, which started in 2019, would be done by the beginning of November. The beginning of November done come and done gone. Accident emergency is still not completed. It appears as if all of these millions and billions of dollars that they're bragging about, that they're collecting, are going to places other than to the healthcare system. At that same hospital, if you walk up one hallway and go down the next, you will go to a kitchen which has been gutted. No stove, no fridge, no ability to cook hot meals at all for any of the patients for the last 6 months. So if you are a patient at Princess Margaret Hospital, you will get a box lunch, a box breakfast, and a box dinner. I would like to know from the Minister of Finance, from the Prime Minister, when will the hospital become a priority, that instead of spending money traveling to Jabim and beyond, you will actually repair the kitchen at Princess Margaret Hospital and complete the accident emergency renovations at PMH. And while we're talking about the math not mathing, and as we talk about issues related to health, we are advised that farmers all over the country find that there's no feed for animals. For the last 8 weeks, we're advised animals have been brought to the point of starvation, to the point where farmers have to make the difficult decision to euthanize their animals because the government has not seen fit to provide feed for farm animals throughout the length and breadth of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. My Lord. And yet, this same administration has said that they're getting ready to go to an election. Well, it is amazing that they can do that since they have not confirmed a parliamentary commissioner. And as I understand, they have now outsourced, I am advised, the parliamentary registration process to a foreign firm. Now, I want to, and they've already paid the fee. This is not something that, well, let me just ask them to deny it or to confirm it publicly. How is it that something so sacred as our democracy, the management of the electoral process, that your New Day administration would feel ought to be taken out of the hands of Bahamians and put in the hands of foreigners to manage? That is what is transpiring at the Parliamentary Registration Department. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have some serious challenges in this country. I'm going to invite Senator Maxine Seymour to be followed by Senator Barnett Ellis to continue to speak to some of these existential, serious challenges.
Good morning, everyone. Straight. Okay. People are at the heart of our problems and our solutions in this country. Until we fix our people, it's going to be difficult to fix anything. And we have a duty. The government has a duty to all of its people, in particular the most vulnerable, and that's the elderly, children, persons with disabilities, women, and those who just need extra care and attention. My biggest concern at the moment is that we are not adequately caring for and protecting children who are at risk. What happened to Adrielle should not have happened to her, and there's absolutely no excuse for it. But the reality is that there is no room in the inn, and so social services employees are constrained because group homes for children don't have any place to receive additional children. The Nazareth Center was in such a poor state, a state of total disrepair for so long. And so those children have been temporarily relocated to a makeshift facility at the William A. Pratt Center for Girls. Meanwhile, the repairs to Nazareth Center are moving at a snail pace, if at all. And so the reality is that there are children at risk, and Adrielle, God rest her soul, is only one of them. And we don't want to have any others suffer. The law needs to be amended so that alerts can go out within a 24-hour period, because every single minute counts. And the reality is that citizens like all of us, are willing to assist the police in search efforts. And so once the alert is sent out immediately, and there's a sense of urgency, then we can all gather and do our part to look for missing children. But it's completely unacceptable to have alerts coming out days, even weeks, after a child has gone missing. We have to protect our children. We have to make space for our children. Temporary shelter in general is not a priority for this administration. The Poinciana Inn is derelict and should not be housing any human beings, much less over 50 women, children, and men. There are security issues at that facility, and there have been breaches. And so the reality is that something has to be done to protect our children. It's not enough to say that, oh, we should have, we could have, we would have. That does not suffice. Because a future citizen of this Commonwealth that had something to offer our country is now deceased. And so no excuse is acceptable. It's time to review our foster care arrangements. Because if there are insufficient spaces at homes for children that we also need to look at expanding, then certainly my family would have been happy to welcome Adrielle in the interim. And so we have to find solutions. We cannot make excuses when it comes to our elderly, our persons with disabilities, and our children, because we have to do all that we can. And I'll tell you, having personally worked on challenges for children not later than this week and last week, I know that many children who are deemed to be suffering or at risk are placed back in home settings where perhaps they ought not to be placed. And this is why training for all staff at the Department of Social Services is important. And we need to start to employ and engage the persons who are currently unemployed, who are holding bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in social work. Because the reality is that none of us, when we take a flight, want to imagine for a moment that the pilot was a good campaign worker. And there are some areas that require technical expertise and knowledge that we have to ensure that we have the absolute most capable people who understand human needs, who are sensitive, who are qualified, who are compassionate, and who can deliver on the level of service that persons in our country deserve when they're interacting with social services. And so we will work. You've heard from our leader. People are our priority in the Free National Movement. And you will see that in a Pintard-led administration. You will see that with our budget allocations. You will see that with our focus. He's spoken to it, our focus on housing, our focus on children. Because we have to ensure that our children get home safely from school, after school. We have to ensure that we work to empower parents. Nobody wants to have children taken out of their homes from the love of their immediate families. But if children are at risk on any level, then we have a duty to protect them. And there's absolutely no excuse for dropping the ball on that. And so I take no excuse at all for that. And so we take seriously our children, we take our elderly seriously, we take persons with disabilities seriously, and we take women seriously. And we continue to work to do our part to ensure that they are safe within their country, within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Morning, sorry. Morning. I think it goes without saying that last week was a gut-wrenching week for all of us. Whether you're a mother or a girl mom like me, or a daughter, it hit home. And when we think about what are the solutions, what could have been different? For me, the most frustrating part of it is we have laws that could have helped. In December of 2022, we passed a new Mental Health Act. But this administration sat on it. They sat on it for over a year. That act did not come into force until earlier this year. Over a year. And they have not put in place any of the mechanisms that the act empowers to do. We have laws on our books that could help, but we're not using them. We are not giving them the resources that they need to implement the laws that we have. Whether we talk about capital punishment, mental health, education, we have laws on our books that can help, but we're not using them. And if this administration had put the resources, had implemented the Mental Health Act, the person who was released from Sandilands, who committed that heinous murder, is alleged to have committed that heinous murder, the person who sat outside Ms. Butler's house and did drugs, all of that could have been prevented. The stakeholders in this country for over 15 years drafted the gender-based violence bill. Multiple administrations, people who are at the forefront of this fight drafted that bill. And this administration unceremoniously watered it down and passed Protection Against Violence. Shame. Shame. The gender-based violence bill allowed stakeholders to come together. It allowed NGOs to help the government. It allowed NGOs to get more intrinsically involved in the fight. But this administration said, no, thank you. We have a conference coming and we need to pass something quickly. And passed Protection Against Violence. And you would think, having passed Protection Against Violence, that they would at least implement the relief and mechanisms contained in that act. But again, they haven't. And on Thursday, we saw the NGOs come out and say, we want to help. Let us help. We have the resources and we are at the forefront of this fight. If we are serious about combating crime, if we are serious about remedying the ills that face us, we must take a holistic approach to the fight on crime. Crime is a public health matter. Mental health, NGOs. How old is Sandilands Rehabilitation Center? We have outgrown it. We have outgrown it. And mental health challenges have evolved. And we deserve a rehabilitation center that has evolved and has capacity to meet our needs. Now is not the time to be passing legislation for passing legislation's sake. Now is the time to take some of that travel money and inject it into the things that Bahamians need you to deal with now. We hope that when it's time to do the budget again next year, we see allocations that reflect that this government has finally decided to make the matters at home a priority. We cannot see a further increase of travel. We need to see an increase in social services. They need to put the shelter line item back in the budget. They need to show us that they are serious about local matters. I think we'll continue this conversation in July. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Don't burst my fantasy. I already don't like daylight saving time. It costs me to lose my day. I'm Ruben. I'm a Bahamian. I'm a proud Foxillian. And I'm an F&M.
Amen.
We have some serious problems in our country. Would you believe, being a part of F&M, I'm not political? I'm result-oriented. Having given 18 years of my life, from George Mackey time, working under 4 commissioners of police, quietly servicing our communities, disregarding excuses that people make because their minds have a lack of creativity, and being driven by the realities I see in my world. The abuse, suffering, the waste, the rape. I had to position myself in an environment where a difference can be made. I remember in a Foxhill Park where, being the president of the Kiwanis Club of Foxhill East Nassau, and we're doing a community event, and 2 people got shot. I can name almost a half a dozen occasions and servings in different communities where people got shot. I remember a man who bled out right at my feet kneeling on Tonic Williams Darling Highway. I remember Dr. Sands when he said something that we need to consider. If it hadn't been for the skill of our doctors and caregivers, our real murder rate would have been through the roof. Not just pushing over 100, but I do believe it would be 300-400. Because they saved their lives, which caused those persons to be in a different category. I was motivated when I got tired of hearing later on that the police found victims of gunshots in remote places. And I said, what if those persons got attention quickly? Their lives could have been saved. Because the shot might have killed them, but they might have bled out. And I searched the world and I found a system called the shot spotter gun detection system. And we promoted it to all the armed forces and everything else. Or the pocket brought it in so they could demonstrate how this can save lives. That once a shot is fired, the police can get there quick. And you hear it all the time on the news, the police commissioners know, saying because of the shot spotter gun detection system. As a nobody didn't have that influence to get it to be a buy-in. But when I brought it to the F&M, you look in the last election manifesto, you would clearly see that we will implement the shot spotter gun detection system. And what that means now is these are the preventative things our leaders spoke about, where we make promises and put our money where the mouth is. And you can hear the stories in our country right now that minutes after the gunshot was fired, where nobody else was around, the police was able to go exactly to where that shot was fired and render help and assistance, and it has been saving lives. I stand with my leader on this salient point, and for me, I will be the canary in the cage for the Free National Movement to ensure that we drive and push to that point that the death penalty is actually restored in our country, because I want us to understand this. It is not about revenge. It is not about hate. It's not about a lack of love. It's actually about the value of life. And if the only deterrent to someone who hates everybody is the assurance that if you kill someone, you, not us, not the country, not anybody else, you forfeit your life. Your life is just as valuable as my life. Your child's life is just as valuable as mine. So let me take this minute to show and answer questions, because I heard a lot of people said that, oh, there's no empirical evidence that murder deter crimes or hanging deter crimes. And I raised this in the Senate 2 sessions ago, and I'm going to raise it to you. Sometimes we look at the number and don't see what we're looking at. The last hanging was Mitchell, and that was in 2000. Do you remember that? Well, let me show you something that happened right after that hanging took place. In 2000, the murder count was 74. Right after that hanging, in 2001, it dropped to 43. In 2002, it's around 52. In 2005, but let me show you something. In 2000, it was 74. There was 1 attempted murder and 1 manslaughter. Let's put them all together. In 2021, it dropped to 43. Attempted murder dropped to 10. Manslaughter dropped to 1. 2022, 202. It went from 50. Manslaughter dropped to 9. Attempted murder dropped to 9. Manslaughter dropped to 1. And 203, it went down 50, 52. And we have again the 9 and the 1. And 203, it went down to 50. There was no attempted murders, and there were 3 manslaughters. In 204, there was 44 murders, no manslaughters, and 2, no attempted murders, and 3 manslaughters. In 2004, we see that move to the point that we have the 40, 0 attempted murder, and manslaughter. And if you move this straight to 2026, you'll see that after that hanging, for 6 years, all the categories of murder crashed. Manslaughter had 0 in 202, 0 in 204, 0 in 205, 0 in 206. Now you tell me what other significant thing happened that could impact the psyche of the Bahamian people to cause the indexes to positively drop for over 6 years. But it's interesting, all the other crimes that don't have that, you lose your life penalty, they were still raging. The rapes, the attempted rape, the unlawful sexual intercourse. Penalties work. Yes. And if a penalty can't work for murder, then you might as well drop all other penalties. Let's not be hypocritical. Penalties are deterrents. And if you can't deter a man from murdering somebody with a sympathetic cry of please don't kill me, then the only thing that could move him is for him to remember you may kill him, but you forfeit your life. Again, it's not about revenge. It ain't about violence. It ain't about a lack of love. It ain't about international opinions and feedback. It's about a value, the value of life. Thank you.
Open the floor for questions from the media.
I'd like to ask all of my colleagues to join me. Please identify the organization that you're from and your name, and please feel free to raise any questions.
Good morning, Anthony McDermott from Our News. To the conversation about the death penalty, we spoke to a few attorneys yesterday who essentially said that it's highly unlikely that that could actually happen in the Bahamas for a few reasons. One of them is because I guess there is no precedence in the court for them to actually hand down such a judgment for cases that have already been. There are likely cases, similar cases that's happened but previous to that one. But then there's the situation of the Privy Council where the Privy Council overturned the Maxwell Tito case in 2011 and deemed that that wasn't the worst of the worst. That's where the worst of the worst term came about. So how then do you or Pintec administration get around that? Is it an option to remove the Privy Council as our highest court, or how do we get around that to actually see capital punishment happen in the Bahamas?
Well, one of the things that we have said previously is that one of the reasons the court overturned the mandatory death sentence, there was a view that it was cruel and unusual, and secondly, that you were robbing jurists or justices of discretion, that we believe that the court ought to have discretion in these kinds of matters. However, we believe that you ought to have definitions of what is the worst of the worst, and that's something that we believe the executive and the parliament ought to spend some time looking at. And you can do that without robbing justices. They can make a determination that the parameters set up by the executive and parliament of the worst, that they agree with it or they disagree with it. We are not interested in removing their discretion, but we are interested in seeking to, again, define what is the worst of the worst. We have a lot of persons who are in the judiciary, members of the legal fraternity, who have an opinion on both sides. One of the things we will do is really have a candid discussion with them with respect to what they believe some of the best remedies are. Certainly, we do not believe that we should remove the Privy Council. So I see something circulating indicating that that's the position of myself. And the FNM, it is untrue. We believe that you're unable, as far as I'm aware, to remove the criminal side and maintain the commercial side. So we have zero interest in sending a message to the local investment community and the international community that we will remove the last court of appeal that we presently have, especially since the Privy Council's view on the death penalty and several other issues is not substantially different than the view of the court in our region. So the Caribbean Court of Justice, again, holds a similar view to the Privy Council, and we are not absolutely convinced that the final court in the Bahamas, that the members on the bench see things fundamentally different than either of those two courts. So we have zero interest in removing the present court that presides over these matters. I don't know if any of my colleagues, we have an attorney who's with us who may wish to comment on it.
So one of the things that I've often called for is sentencing guidelines. And sentencing guidelines give judges a discretion, but they set up, I guess, more formal parameters in terms of sentencing. One of the ways that you can do that, or one of the ways that we could incorporate capital punishment into that, is when you get to the category of murder, set out in your sentencing guidelines what we consider to be the worst of the worst, so that judges have the discretion to sentence somebody to death within those parameters.
Sorry, just before you move on from that, I've heard at least two a present prime minister and a former prime minister indicate that they fully support the death penalty. The question I would ask is, what evidence is there that you supported it? Is there any particular step you took going into your toolbox of options? My view was clearly you read the death notice as long as a judge has already indicated that you ought to be put to death. Has any of the former prime ministers, for example, read a death notice during that period? Now, I suspect that most of the persons who are on death row now, the time period has already run up where automatically now you must commute that death sentence to life. But at the time when that was available, and I remember former prime minister sought to sue me on this issue because I said, clearly there's no evidence, so what they say can't be real. So again, when persons say they are in support of the death penalty, I asked the present prime minister, he made that statement. What evidence is there? What exactly have you done? What options have you explored? Which group of attorneys, eminent scholars have you brought in to help you see how you could navigate the judicial system in a lawful way to implement what you believe, because we know the majority of Bahamians believe that this is something that is necessary. I believe that the Prime Minister is just playing pure politics. So he's neither in support of the death penalty, and he's clueless in terms of what to do around the preventative side that he says he and his team are working on. Where is the prevention?
So you mentioned that I guess it's for the Parliament then to outline what the worst of the worst could look like, right?
Sentencing guidelines.
Sentencing guidelines. So there is a provision, and if I'm not mistaken, the penal code that speaks to if the murder of a law enforcement officer while executing his duty, the murder of a judicial officer while acting in the execution of duty, murder of a person acting on the powers given police, a murder of a person if they are a witness to the case, a juror, a murder committed in the course of a robbery, rape, kidnapping, terrorism, and other felonies. That's in Penal Code 290, if I'm not mistaken. Are you suggesting that maybe that needs to be amended to, I guess, give more detail or to add more to that?
I think it obviously has to be amended. The Tito case, if I recall correctly, was a heinous murder. I mean, in fact, the circumstances of the child that was murdered, again, is worse than what you just read. And still the justices, again, rejected that as being worst of the worst. So we have to have a hard discussion as a community as we go into this exercise, but it is an exercise of discussing sentencing guidelines that we have to go into.
So then again, what is the likelihood of it actually happening? Because with what we have now, we see people instances where someone is killed in the course of a murder, rape, armed robbery, a felony. We see police officers that are killed in the line of duty. Not often, but sometimes that happens. We see situations, I think one of them also speaks to hit. We see things like that happening already, but yet this isn't the case where they get that death penalty sentence. So then what can be done to ensure that happens, even if we amend this?
Right, so we've answered, I think, in terms of our commitment to engage in the discussion so that such amendment can occur. You asked the likelihood. Again, we can't speak for justices and what their final determinations will be. We can speak for us, and we are resolute to do the work that is required, and then the judiciary, which is an independent arm of government, they will have to go ahead and do their job. But we can do ours. We're not going to waffle like this administration and start stuttering when you ask them, what is it you intend to do? Because nothing you are doing right now is actually working.
Yes, Jose Edit from Eyewitness News. I know yesterday at a press conference, Social Services Minister Marcel basically admitted that social services, the ministry officials at the Social Services Ministry could have done better to assist Adriel based on at least 2 complaints that were reported back in 2022. That was something that family members told us, right, in an interview last week. And so here is the minister. Some would argue he was basically admitting negligence on behalf of the state. Here it is now, 12-year-old age rule is now dead, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there needs to be an investigation as to what happened, because we don't, right now we're relying on his word. We don't know whether it's negligence, but there needs to be an independent investigation to determine what was done, and if something improper was done, then there need to be consequences that follow.
Also, the minister spoke about difficulties that they encounter with, right, in trying to render assistance to families, children who may need support. They're grappling with this narrative that in the process of trying to assist families who are in need, they are trying to split families. I don't know if you can speak to this, Maxine, Senator Maxine, or perhaps you, Mr. Leader, but how can officials perhaps come up with better intervention measures to help families, even if they have to move with a heavy hand?
Okay,
So it's better to be safe than sorry, and to err on the side of caution, right? And so it's better to move with a heavy hand and have a child survive than to not move with a heavy hand and have a child end up fatally hurt. And so the reality is that this is where sensitivity and proper training comes into play. And this is where we need to have certain resources in terms of people, because many of the staff at the Department of Social Services are overworked, because after work, they're working overtime, covering off at some of the group homes for children because of staff shortages and other issues. And so it's time to really look at the social workers, look at the career paths, and to make sure that we are properly investigating these matters and we're taking children to safety. And that's why space is important, to have somewhere for them to go, and that's why we also need to review our foster care guidelines, because even if while social services looks more in depth into a situation, they need to take a child away for like a period of 3 to 5 days or something, that is better than to know that you left the child exposed to imminent danger. And during that 3 to 5 days, obviously it's important to know that the kind of support system for the child, there will be some separation anxiety and other issues going on, but we have to listen to our children. World Children's Day was celebrated last week, and the theme for this year for UNICEF was to listen to the children, and the children of the future. And many times in our country, regrettably, we have been raised to understand that children need to be seen and not heard. And that's part of our challenge, because if we speak to our children, they will tell us what some of their challenges are, what their concerns are, what they're facing, what the risks are to them, and we have to listen to them. Children need to be seen and heard in this Commonwealth, and we need to act when they're at risk. And so for sure, there's no excuse. Once a report comes in, we have to look into it, and we have to take it seriously. And the final thing that I want to say is that while I'm a mother, I must admit that not in all cases, children are better off with their mothers. But regrettably, it seems as if, in our country, the system always favors, or more often favors, the mother over the father. And that also leaves many children at risk, because there are some good fathers in this country. Okay? Not all men are barred. Not all men are criminals. Not all men are pedophiles. And there are some fathers who are separated from their children, who can give their children the quality of life they deserve. But unfortunately, we always see the mother as the better option, and that is not always the case. And so our system needs to start to look outside the box, and we need to figure out what is the best solution for each child based on the case at hand. We need to be more open-minded.
Just in terms of the financial component, social services is under-resourced. And if the Prime Minister is serious about these issues, he would, in his budget exercise, provide the requisite resources for the Department of Social Services. They are not serious about providing those resources. There is a need for halfway houses for women and children often who are fleeing violent situations. How complex is it for us to build facilities that will enable families to have a refuge for the defined period of time until they are able to find new accommodations. We have, the government itself have numerous buildings that are dilapidated, that can be retrofitted in order to accommodate persons. They have them in the Family Islands as well as they have them in New Providence. So one has to think that there's just a lack of commitment. This is not a priority until it becomes a newsworthy item, and then you would have government officials talking about it. The second thing is, those of us who have supported REACH and who have relatives, friends, who know constituents who are on the autism spectrum, that the community has a group of dedicated executives who are interested in building a facility that cater to persons who are impacted by autism, and again, that deal with children as well as adults who have different needs. The government ought to move in haste to finish the process, to allocate the land required. There are architects who are on standby willing to help. There are private citizens who would be willing to help. The government ought to move with a sense of urgency in helping the disabled community in order for them to have the requisite resources, land being one component.
Senator Barnett, I know you castigated government as it relates to that man who allegedly strangled to death, young Adrian, noting that the mental health bill was dragged, etc., that you're factored in with some on both, right? But would you say the critics who may argue that the government ought not to be blamed? We saw some arguments that relatives of that man should have been more prudent about his whereabouts to ensure that he would, for lack of a better word, retained. What do you make of those? What do you say to those arguments?
The government cannot delegate its responsibility to take care of its citizens. When you have persons with mental diseases who have mental health issues, we ought to have a government in place that is capable of taking care of and providing them with the treatment that they need. Obviously, what has happened, has allegedly happened, demonstrated that he has not been treated, and he has not been, for lack of a better word, cured. And so we cannot pass the buck. Not everybody can be released into society. We need to expand the Sandilands Rehabilitation Center. We have outgrown it. There are countless individuals that we see walking the streets. There are countless persons who have family members that they have tried to have admitted as a patient, but there has been no space in the bureaucracy, and they are left helpless. And so we need to look at that. Again, it goes to resources and budget allocation.
Eyewitness News. Earlier you brought up the idea of capital punishment. So my question would be, what you would consider gruesome crime, and who would decide when that would be implemented? Because you also mentioned rehabilitation. Is someone not allowed to commit a gruesome crime but also feel true remorse and then be rehabilitated? Or is that just a one-shot, you've committed some atrocity and you should be instantly put to death by the government?
Again, I think we've spoken to this matter. We support sentencing guidelines, and we intend to work from the executive standpoint with other stakeholders in coming up with what we believe to be the most appropriate sentencing guidelines. And if the crime that is committed falls within the realm of that, unfortunately, that person has missed that opportunity for second opportunity. If a justice then again sentence them to death, we intend to follow the law. We have numerous opportunities for our children to again develop healthy lifestyle habits that will keep them out of the hands of the law. We have many adults who have committed crimes when they were younger. Some of them have committed crimes now that they're older. And there are a host of programs designed to help them change the course of their lives so that they don't end up committing what you call the most gruesome of crimes, taking somebody's life in the most gruesome way. And so, again, all of us as responsible adults, we have ample opportunity to make wise decisions. In almost every neighborhood, there are multiple churches, faith-based organizations. We have motivational speakers. We have parents who are daily trying to impart the proper values to their children. So this notion of that you can avoid taking the advice and changing your conduct and appeal to that when you have snuffed out somebody's life in the most callous and gruesome manner to appeal for another chance. Unfortunately, that ship would have sailed.
If I may, we are discussing this as if the Bahamas ought not lead the conversation. I must remind everyone that we are among the 10 most violent countries in the world. That the rate of murder in the Bahamas, if not the top 10, certainly in the top 20, and has been so consistently year after year after year with peaks and valleys. And so while we may respect the views of country A or country B, Bahamians are crying out for leadership and direction. And we ought to lead this discussion and not follow recommendations from places that don't suffer the way Bahamians are suffering every day.
And my follow-up question would almost just be more of a fact check. I know you had mentioned the kitchen renovation of the PMH hospital, which is now relocated to the university's kitchen. So they are technically still doing their task in packaging their food in the proper packaging. So I just wanted to really touch on the box lunch.
Again, I think you have confirmed that the kitchen at Princess Margaret Hospital. So let's imagine that tomorrow, God forbid, we have, I think, 4 more days in the hurricane season, and we have been spared, S-P-A-R-E-D, by the grace of God. But imagine that we had a weather-related crisis, such that you could not get from that kitchen to Princess Margaret Hospital. How would those patients eat? And so I put it to you that while this stopgap measure should have worked for a day or a week or maybe a month, the fact that it has now been, and I'm advised, 6 months is absolutely unacceptable.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We just want to remind those residents from Grand Bahama who are tuned in that we continue to ask the government when will they be able to execute the sale of the Grand Lucayan. The Deputy Prime Minister has been sidelined by the Prime Minister himself on this issue, and yet there's very little movement. When could we expect that the airport will proceed the construction in Grand Bahama? Once again, the Prime Minister and the Chairman has sidelined the Deputy Prime Minister, and yet no progress is being made. This is an administration that overpromises and underdelivers.
Thank you very much.